I think we spent some time trying to understand, what we have learned and what could be the interview questions over the past couple of days. And so let me quickly recap so that we have that continuation. We looked at what all we would do as a business analyst as part of the planning of the project. So when the project managers are preparing the project plan, where do we contribute and what do we need to know about scope management, change management, and risk management. We learned about that stuff as part of the planning phase. And we looked at the various ways in which we would engage with the business team and understand the requirements, right? So it always will not be a one-on-one discussion. There are multiple other techniques. So and we looked at each one of them, and we clearly have an understanding about which technique to use under what context, right? So effectively, we have all the necessary frameworks and tools to understand the requirements. Then we looked at a couple of ways in which we would document our requirements as well, right? So we looked at data flow diagrams in a very high-level view. We looked at ER models and understood how data is stored in your database, how is it structured, and we understood about how to document the requirements using use cases. Okay. Now we have that broad understanding about object orientation and where does this use case diagram fit into this overall scheme of things. Okay. And we also, to an extent, covered how do we capture the request in a coming out for a change request, right? So typical day-to-day work, what you do, either you'll work on a brand new project wherein the requirements are captured into a use case model and into a detailed BRD, or you would support a project wherein enhancements would come in and then you would do that using a change request, right? So we looked at that view. So today, let's spend some time understanding about how the typical structure of a BRD would be like. So I'm just picking up a template. Now, any organization you go, right? So you generally have these BRD templates, right? So you don't have to prepare it from scratch. You're not expected to give a structure to it. The structure would already be defined. They will clearly give you the sections, and you'll have the instruction about what needs to go into these documents. So so that's what templates are for. So you get these templates. All you need to do is read those guidelines and ensure that those specific details are captured in this document. Okay. Now what I would be doing today is I'll cover the broader structure of a BRD document, the business requirements document, right? So what all details go into a BRD, and typically when you work on any project, right? So what are the details you capture, right? So we'll look at that. Okay. So generally there would be a context setting introduction section wherein we'll talk about what are the project objectives, what are the business benefits you would get from that, and what was the project background, right? So you'll talk about what kind of business case document was prepared, or what kind of analysis was done, right? And the approvals and so you'll set the context saying that we have done till this point, and this project is going to achieve these objectives, right? Then you'll also list down the key people in the project, right? So who is the sponsor, who is the solution owner, who are the SMEs, right? So you'll identify those stakeholders. You could even do that using an RSA matrix, right? So ideally, if you have that, you can just use it here, or at least list down the key people. And if you are dependent on any system, you have to connect or interface with any system. You link that as well. Okay. Any assumptions, any references that you want, you typically capture that in your first section of the document. Okay. So I think a little more details are there in these templates, and I think you can read that at a leisure time. Broadly, it talks about who are the key people who should be reading this document, what project background it is, what is the purpose of this document, what are the project goals, objectives that needs to be achieved, what are the benefits you would get, right, for the key people, right? So a lot of this would have been covered in most of your earlier documents, like The project background would come in from your earlier business case document or your RFP and all. You'll have to give that context. Purpose of the business requirements is basically to elaborate onto the detailed features and agree onto the detailed functional requirements. The business goals and objectives would have been covered as part of your business case document or your um, your RFP responses, right? So generally capture that. It's more like you're using that content again here. So you copy it and then use it here. So you're not writing that content anyway. So it's generally a section which is taken from most of the other documents, right? So nothing much which you'll write except for maybe the the identified stakeholders you'll list down. The benefits and rationale also would have been addressed in your business case document. You'll get that. Dependencies on the system, you'll have to figure out what system you'll interface with at a high level and then link that. Right? Any assumptions you think are relevant, you can add that in. Right? So that would be generally the first section you will start. Then you clearly call out what is the scope of the project. Okay. Now this again is a replication from your earlier documents, either in your RFP response or your SOW or your business case document, right? You would have agreed on that this is the scope that we are going to deliver, and this is in scope and this is out of scope. You clearly call out, and so this definitely would be there in your SOW, right? So you're just picking that up and then using it here. So there's nothing that you're identifying as part of the the requirement elicitation process. This in scope and out of scope would have clearly been called out as part of your SOW, right? So you're just using that content again here to set the context. So it will help you, give a perspective and clearly know that these are the 10, 20 features that we have agreed into the system, and which will be elaborated further, right? So section 2 is basically saying that okay, we have agreed on this this scope of the project, and the functional requirements, which is the next section, would elaborate each of those features. Okay, so that's how you would start it off. Now, the way your functional requirements are captured would depend on the type of project also, right? In some cases, it would be a process reengineering project. Some cases, it could be a new development project. In some cases, it could be a combination of both, right? So I'll set that context over here, and then we'll see how do we approach our functional requirements and how do we document it. Okay, so ideally, if it's a process reengineering project, which means you have an existing process or an existing system which is not so efficient, and you're trying to replace it or enhance it to make it better, right? So these kind of projects are classified as a process engineering type. Okay, so wherein you will understand how the current things are done, how is the current process going to be there, right? And then you'll also figure out what is going wrong in this process. So what's wrong with this current process, right? So the challenges would be highlighted as part of the current process, and then you would capture the to be state. So the to be state would basically tell what is the future state you want to be in, or once you have addressed those challenges or pain points, how would your new process flow would look like, or what would be the new way of working, right? So ideally, you're re-engineering the process. That's the reason it's called as a business process re-engineering, BPR projects, or broadly process re-engineering kind of projects, right? You're trying to make an existing system more efficient. So in these kind of context, generally you'll follow this methodology, this structure, right? You'll depict what the current process is, then the challenges with this, and then maybe the to be state, right? So this all purely depends upon the requirement. I'm just picking up some example so that you can, right? So maybe this is how the current process might be. So you're saying that okay, this is how the current process is, and you'll try to make it more efficient, right? So where there are too many interactions, you're trying to streamline it and make it better. So your to be process would look like this, right? So it's just a set of two diagrams that you will come up with, right? So let's say you have a restaurant and then you want to streamline the burger order process, right? Now first the customer approaches the cashier, then he orders burger, then you check if you want fries, then he will order fries. Otherwise, if it's no, then he will ask whether he wants drink, then you'll order drink, and then the customer pays cash, right? Now you will see that most of the customers order burger, fries, and then drinks. So rather than have these three steps, you say, okay, now let me come up with a combo meal. Then combine everything. It will make my process easier. It will be done in like much faster, right? So you picked up a process and made it more efficient, all right? So this is the general process engineering structure, right? So the same would be applicable for any IT project as well, right? So if there could be some steps which you are doing in the system, then you'll find that there are some gaps or some challenges in the current process which you'll try to identify by your discussions with the SMEs. And then once you have that insights, then you'll go ahead and then say, what, we can re-engineer this and make it look better. So you'll come up with this to-be process, right? That's all what we're doing in this as is and then to-be state, right? So you're trying to depict, most of the times it's depicted using a flow chart. Okay, how to draw flow charts and the terminologies and symbols and all, I'll cover that later. But that is a structure you will take to come up with this as is and future state, right? And a lot of your change requests also that follow the same way, right? So you'll have something like you would have a current screen or current process which has some let's say this is the 3 screens that you have as part of the current process, right? So you'll capture some details here, then details, and then finally confirm it over the 3rd screen, right? Now the SME might feel, okay, this is a redundant way. Rather than have these 3 screens, I'll just do all of it in one screen. Effectively, you have reduced these 3 steps into one single slide, right? And doing it in a better way. So this is as is process. So you'll depict that the current process has these 3 steps, and in the to-be process, I'm coming up with just one screen and then addressing this requirement, right? So when you're drafting a change request also, you can follow the same structure. Currently it's done this way. Now you have to go into this to-be format and then capture it there, right? Very simple structure, and any changes to the requirements generally are handled like this. Most of the change requests are follow the structure of as is and to-be state, because you clearly have a way of doing things, and then you're modifying it and coming up with a to-be state. Most of the process engineering kind of projects, you'll follow the same methodology. Most of the change request, you'll follow the same methodology, right? So if any change request has to be implemented, you'll use the same methodology of depicting the current process, and then try to make it more efficient, and then come up with the to-be state. Okay, so this framework would be used for most of your change requests. Okay, so whenever you are asked to work on a change request, right? So first understand how the current process is done, document that as part of your initial flow, and then say, these are the issues or pain points in this current state, and if we address that, the new process would look something like this and come up with the to-be view, right? Now very simple structure. So follow this whenever a change request comes in. Most of your change requests would be documented using this format, right? To an extent, most of your to an extent the BRDs for process engineering kind of projects also would be handled in the same way. Okay, then let's ignore this functional hierarchy diagram. I'll come over to that later, right?
As you said, when a change request comes, you need to form these 3, for suppose these 3 steps as you have on the screen in a one screen, to-be screen. So
Right.
Even if there is no change in request, why can't that 3 steps be as simple as to-be one?
So see, that's what we are trying to do in a change request, right? So a change request, why would a change request come in? It could come in because the SMA would not like something the way he's doing things, or he thinks that there is a better way of doing it. Right?
Okay.
Why do you change something? To make it better, make it more efficient, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's exactly what we are trying to do, right? So when the change request comes in, so you'll have to engage with the SME and try to understand how is the current process done, right? And then he will also maybe
Okay.
he'll have some of his ideas in saying that we are doing a lot of redundant things here. Maybe instead of having these three screens, we can just have one screen, right? And you also have to think through and analyze it. So why are we doing these three steps? Question that current process, and then see where
Mm-hmm.
exactly are the challenges or issues in this current process, right? Try to address that. You'll come up with a better way of doing things. Okay. So once you arrive at this better way of doing things, this is what exactly needs to be changed in the system now, right? So I'm just giving you an example. So three steps coming out to one. In fact, it could even go into 4 steps also. So even having 4 screens could be an efficient way of doing things. Maybe this is not doing it correctly, and then maybe you need to add one more screen in between. So that purely depends on the context and the requirement. But the objective is you are looking at the current process and making it better.
Okay, this change request, goes after all the process of change management.
Yes. So the change request, broadly the SME would say, no, I want this change to be implemented. Now, so he will just give you 1-2 liners, and you'll have to elaborate that completely into your change request document, right? What is the solution? How is the system going to handle this? Earlier you had these 3 steps. Now you might have one. You have a question? Okay. So earlier you had 3 steps. Now you're changing that and then saying, okay, you know what? Rather than 3 steps, let's have it in one single step, right? So or maybe it could even be 2 screens, or it could even end up having 4 screens could be a better way of doing things also, right? So that purely depends on that current requirement. Okay. So all you're trying to do is make the process better by engaging with the customer, understanding the current way of doing things, and then thinking through whether we can make it better. Okay. Some of the inputs would come in from the SME. Some of them you would think through and then say, this is a better way of doing things. So you will suggest some changes. Finally, you will agree with the SME and then document it as part of your change request. I hope that's making things clear of what goes into a change request. Mohsin, was that you asked?
Yes, I got the idea.
Yeah. So it's not like you have 3 steps that you have to convert it into one single step. That's not the idea. The idea is to make it better. So the better solution.
Yes, I just got.
Okay.
Yeah, with your example, just we need to summarize that and keep it efficient in whatever possible. It's not about only the 3 steps, as you said.
Yeah. So we're trying to make it better. So we'll take the inputs from the SME. We will also analyze it and then say that it was being done in this way, and then we are suggesting an alternative way and a better way. So the change request is all about that. So implementing that new way, right? So once you give this to be view to the developers, then they will look at it. Okay, it was currently being done in this way. Now he wants it done in this way. So let's go ahead and then make those changes. So the technical team would take it on from there, right? So in a change request, your work is much simpler. You're understanding the current process, and then the customer is suggesting some change, and then you're documenting all that. So this was done in this way, and now you have to go and then do it in a different way. Okay. So that's approach which you take for handling most of your change request. Okay. Then a lot of your new development projects, right? You don't have this view, right? So there is no existing system. So you'll have to start your requirements from the scratch. Like for example, take the mobile banking application which we generally talk about, right? Now there is no existing system, right? All you have to capture it in from the scratch. Right, so it's a brand new development project that you're working on, and you have to capture the requirements for that. So most of the times you tend to capture that using a use case model. Okay, so I think we've dealt that in detail. We understand that you have to first create the use case diagram and then the use case narrative for each of those use cases, right? So as part of that overall process of documenting the requirements, you first capture the actors, right? Who are the people that are being that are using this system, right? So if you pick up a mobile banking application, maybe the customer is using it definitely. Then maybe there would be other systems which your mobile banking system has to interact with, like you have to interact with the deposit system, loan system to get some of those transactions actually done, right? So those are other actors which you'll figure out. Okay, so you list down all those actors. Okay, then what do? Then you would go ahead and then broadly define what is the use case diagram, right? So you'll say, my actors are, let's say, customer of the bank. Then you have a system. You also have a deposit system which you are interacting with. You also have a loan system which your mobile banking is interacting with. Right. So first step is identifying these actors. You'll say that these are the three people that we are interacting with, and then we'll give a small description about those actors over here. Right. Then you would draw the use case diagram and say, okay, these three actors are there, and this is the system. What would the system do? It will allow you to log in. Okay. Then it will allow you to check your account balance. It will allow you to transfer funds. It will allow you to pay bills. Right? Yeah, let's keep it simple. And then, so all these things are, who is using it? The customer is using it. So you link it to those features. Okay. Now, all these features are coming in from your scope. Right? So the section 2, what you have listed down, these are the features that were agreed upon to be delivered of the system. So those features you are converting into the use case diagram. Okay. Now, some of these use cases would also need interaction with other system, like when you want to check your account balance. Where is account balance coming in from? It's coming from the deposit system. This is a deposit system. This is the loan system. And this is the customer. Okay. Then you want to transfer funds. So transfer funds has to interact with which system? Deposit system. Okay. Then paying your bills has to interact with what? Your deposit system, right? So maybe when you want to check your account balance of loan balance also, or how much is the loan pending about. So you'd do the same, use the same transaction, right? So you'll figure out what is the loan pending amount, or if you want to pay loan amount, right? So you can do that over here also. So each of these features are also interacting with other systems, so you're pointing that out, right? So you'll end up creating this use case diagram. Okay. Now what? Now we have that high level view. We know that these 4 features have to be delivered. There are 3 people who are using it, and you clearly figured out, who is using what feature. Then what do we have to do? We have to explain each of these use cases in detail. Right? So you'll pick up the first one, login feature. Okay. So for each of those features, you will write a use case narrative. So it will be something like this. Right? So I'll give a use case name. You'll say login into the system. Right? So you can briefly describe it. So this feature is used to log in into the system. It will authenticate the customer, and then you would log in into the system. Who are the actors? The customer is the actor. He is logging in. Right? So business rules, are there any business rules that you'll have to look at it? Ignore that. I'll come back to that again once we complete this process. Hold on to this business rules for now. Then what is the basic flow? He will first open the application. Then he would enter his user ID. He would enter his password and click on submit. Okay. Then he would be displayed the home page. Right? So these are the 4 basic steps involved in the in the basic or primary flow. Right? So you could even show that screens, right? So your login screen would look like this. As part of the basic flow, you could even have this, screen out, you could layout, right? And then there would be a submit, there would be a reset button. Right? You enter user ID, you enter password, and then you click on submit. Then your home page is displayed with all the options, like check balance, transfer funds, pay bills. Right? So all those options are coming out here, right? Now this is giving you a very clear view that the customer is coming over and then opening the app. This is the first screen. Then he would enter the details and click submit. Then he should be shown this screen, right? So it need not be always in a step-by-step process. You could even use the screen, the wireframe, and then explain that this is how your first screen would look like, and then this is how the second screen would look like. So it's up to you how you want to, how detailed you want to go, right? So there's no one defined way that you have to do it. Okay, so you do that using your basic flow. Then what? Now you'll figure out, okay, what if I enter the password incorrectly, right? So maybe I should be displayed a whole error message, right? So you'll say if user ID is incorrect, display this error message. If password is incorrect, display this message. If password entered incorrectly 3 times, block his user ID, right? And then maybe send them an SMS also, right? So all these are alternate flows. If something, if the user is providing a different input than what is expected, how should the system respond, right? So all those would come out in your alternate flows. You list them down. So any non-functional requirement specific to this, right? So generally it won't be specific to a particular use case, but in case something is there, you'll capture that. I'll talk about the non-functional requirements later in the document. So for now, let's hold on to that. Then you'll list down any preconditions. So before we log in, do you have to have any checks? Yes, obviously, the user should be registered, right? He should be a valid user with the bank, and then should have enabled for that mobile banking application. Okay, only when that is ticked, then he can go and then log in into the system. You should have been registered, and then you should have a user ID password name. Okay, once he gets that, then only he can register. Okay, so that's the preconditions. What are the post conditions? Maybe once he logs in, then you'll show him the home screen anyway. Then maybe you'll update the login also. The last time he has logged in is on this particular date, this time, so that you have an audit log when this person is logging in and out. Okay. Then if you figure out that there are some relationships which could make it better, right? So you'll add that. So all those relationships, if there is a generalization, right? So that would be inherited parent use case. If there is an include, you list down the included use cases. If it's an extended, you list down the extended use cases. Right? Ideally, that should have been drawn in the use case diagram also, and you list it out in the use case description as well. Okay, so this is how you would typically document your functional requirement. Okay, so clear about this process, because this is very important. A lot of your time you're just doing this, right? So you're getting the requirement, drawing a use case diagram, and then explaining each of the use cases into the use case diagram. So your section 3 broadly covers this. Your functional requirements would either be one of those process reengineering projects where you model the as-is flow and then come up with a to-be flow. And most of your change requests would also be in the same format, or you would use this use case methodology to capture your high-level view using the use case diagram and elaborating each of the use cases in the use case diagram. So clear about this? Are you clear about how do we document the requirements, functional requirements into the BRD?
So the use case diagram, do we use it like most of the time? I mean, I don't know how frequently use case diagram we use.
So any new project that's being done, generally the use case diagram would be prepared. So it won't be done for the change request and all. But if it's a new project that you're trying to develop, most of the requirements are captured using use cases. Okay. If there is a BRD that you are creating, there would definitely be a use case diagram in it. Okay. But if you are creating a change request, might not be. So you might not create the change, use case diagram in it. Right? You're just mentioning that change and then covering it out. But if a full-fledged system is being developed and a detailed BRD is being written, the functional requirements are generally captured using a use case diagram. Okay.
Okay.
So clear about this process, or you want me to explain again? Do that, but make sure that you understand it. Right. So that's what I want. Even if you have the little doubt, make sure that you clarify that.
How easy it is to figure out what's the basic flow, what's the alternate flow? Is it?
Now, all this would come in as part of your discussions, right? So when you are going and then talking to the SME, right? So this is exactly what you're trying to find out, right? So it's not expected that you know everything. So you're understanding this from the SME, right? So nobody would ask you should know this process, right?
No, but whom should this discussion would go to SME and
So you will talk with SME and then understand. So it will be in your interview techniques or observation technique, or sometimes you will conduct a workshop, right? You will read some documents and understand the SOP, the current as is process. You could read document analysis. You would use all those techniques which we covered in our observation technique, the elucidation techniques, right? So you'll use these various techniques. So now we have covered this in detail, right? So how do we engage the customer and understand the requirements? So we may, we'll start by reading some documents, then we'll talk to people, then we'll see how they're doing things, then we'll draw the prototypes also. Prototypes again are part of your use case diagram. Again, you'll show those screens as part of your basic flow maybe, right? You could conduct a focus group or a brainstorming session, right? So all these techniques you would use to understand the requirement. That understanding would go in as part of your use case diagram and use cases. Okay, I hope that answered your question.
Yeah.
Okay, let me quickly revise, about how do we capture the functional requirements. For now, I'm deleting this section. It's not relevant over here. Maybe I'll cover that later. But to avoid the confusion, I'm removing that. So your functional requirements would broadly captured in two ways. If it's a process reengineering process way, you would use this as is and to be framework. Right, so that you have again understood. That part is clear, right, Mohsin? You are the one who are asking the question.
Yes.
Yeah. So if it's a new development, let's say you're developing a new completely system, and you have to create a new BRD, right? So obviously you have a list of some features that were agreed upon as part of your your scope in your SOW. Your SOW would have listed down some features like again you should be able to transfer funds, you should be down your SOW. Okay, now so when you start your requirement elicitation, you will first figure out who are all the key people who will be using the system, right? So you're identifying the actors. Okay, so you'll figure out, okay, let's keep it simple, let's have only the deposit system and the actor, the customer, right? Now I'm taking the example of a mobile banking application. The reason being, everybody uses a mobile banking app, so they know how it works, right? So functionality wise, we understand it. So it's easier to discuss that when we are talking about the requirements. Okay. Now we will all be the customers when we are using the mobile banking app. So we are the customers, right? Now, so we'll, as a business analyst, when we are trying to understand the requirement, first we'll figure out the people who are using the system, right? And what are the other systems which your system would interact to get its details, right? So, for example, your mobile banking application. Let's say you want to check your account balance. Where is that information coming from? So that information would have been stored in some other system, right? So your mobile banking will not store all your account information and all. So let's say there is a deposit system. So your system is interacting with the deposit system as well to get this account balance or maybe a funds transfer. So all the transactions would be directed to this, and then you'll get a confirmation back saying that the transaction is completed or not. So your system has to interact with this. So broadly there are two actors that we identified, right? So then you would figure out what are all the features. We are saying that, okay, now we need to log in into the system. Then we need to check account balance. We need to transfer funds. We need to pay bills. Okay. So for logging into the system, who will use that? A customer would use it, right? So he would open the application. He would go to the login screen. He will enter user ID, password, and click on submit. Right. So that is one thing that the customer would use it for, right? So we are converting this SOW into the use case diagram first. So each and everything what is listed here, there are 4 things. We'll ensure that all those 4 things are addressed in the use case diagram. Now once we have this view, we know that these are the people and these are the features that the system is offering, and these are the people who are using it. Okay. Then what you do is, let's say, yeah, I'm just connecting. So now my use case diagram is complete. Then what do we do? Then we will say, we are still not clear about how each of these requirements are met, right? So how do we log in into the system? So that's not explained anywhere, right? So we have to do that explanation somewhere, right? So where do we do that? We would write a use case narrative for each one of these use cases, right? And we also discussed this in length. This is a typical format of a use case description, right? So you would pick up each use case and then write in these details. Clear about it? So let's take one example and then write. So let's say a login into the system, right? So you'll give the use case name as login. Then broadly you'll describe what it is trying to do. It is trying to authenticate a customer's user ID password and then allowing him to log in into the application. Who are the people using it? It's the customer who is using it, right? Ignore the business rules. I'll come to that later. What is the basic flow? So you'll have first a login screen, right? It will have a user ID. It will have a password, and then you will submit it. And maybe you want to reset the data, right? So this is how your login screen would look like. So this is nothing but you are doing some prototyping and then coming with some screen. Okay. Then once you enter the details, what happens? It should display your home page. Okay. A home page, what all should be there in your home page? Maybe it should have a check account balance, transfer funds, pay bills, right? So your home screen should look with these, like this, and these are the three options which should be available, right? So we have explained the process of how a login would work. Okay. Similarly, we will write another use case narrative for how a checking account balance would look like. Right. So similarly, we will write another use case using the similar format. We'll say that check account balance. For the actors, it's a customer. Then the basic flow would be you will click on this button in the home page, and then it would send details to this deposit system. Send the request to deposit system. Deposit system would revert back with the details. We would revert with the details, and then you would display those details onto the screen of the customer, right? So you could define that screen of how the details would be displayed, and you could even draw a flow chart to explaining how these interactions between the customer, mobile banking, and deposit system would have. So you could pictorially represent it using a flow chart. All that can be done, but primarily you're trying to list down the flow in which the interactions happen, or you're basically detailing out this requirement. Clear about it? Clear about the structure? We first have the list of requirements. We are converting it into a use case diagram. Then each use case we are elaborating in a use case framework. Make sense?
Yes, Raj.
Okay. So no, again, it's not like a one-day process. It's a tedious process. Again, you'll have to think through a lot of things. You have to ensure that all your features are converted into use case diagram, right? And then broadly, each of these features is explained in detail using this use case narrative, right? We call this as a use case narrative or use case description. Okay. So all these. So this is the typical framework. You'll have actors, you'll have basic flow, alternate flows, preconditions, post conditions, relationships, right? And any business rules also. Something is if some checks have to be performed or some validations have to be performed, you'll put that under your business rules. Okay. So overall, this is how your functional requirements would be captured. Right? Your scope would be listed down from your SOW. This would generally be the section 2. Right? Then you identify the actors. Then you identify the use case diagram. And then you would write the use case description. or use case narrative. Clear about this?
Yes.
Okay. So a typical structure of your BRD would look like this, up to the functional requirements. Okay. Then I'm erasing all the drawing. Yeah. I'd also keep these data requirements under yeah. Okay. So then there would be another section on the non-functional requirements. Okay. So let's look at the TOC first, so that we have that high-level view. Right. So we understand till this point. So the first section would be an introduction document, introduction section. Then you would list down the scope of the project. Then you would capture the functional requirements. Right. So functional requirements also we are clear. What are the current state, and then your challenges and to be state. So this is one format where you would use it for process engineering kind of projects, right? And if it's a new project where you have to completely develop it, you would use a use case methodology. So you will identify the actors, you will draw the use case diagram, you will write the use case specification or use case narrative for each of those use cases to understand the requirements.
Like functional requirements are the high-level requirements that can be gathered during the initial stages of the project. But non-functional requirements are generally problems that will come during the project, during the project is running.
No. I think you have a different understanding about non-functional requirements. I'll come to that. But I think what you're trying to say is that there would be a business requirement and a functional requirement. So they call sometimes you'll hear the term business requirement, and then you look at a functional requirement, right? Now, so in case you want to, so if you want to depict the business requirement separately, right? So you'll just say the team wants to do these activities, right? The functional requirements are explained using the use case diagram. Business requirements is nothing but you are explaining it in a very high level view that this is what needs to be done, right? So it could be done using a small paragraph written in English, or it could be done using some flowchart diagram, but a very generic way in which you will explain what needs to be done. Okay, so if you say log in into the system, the business requirement is the user should be able to log in into the system. He should be validated, and the user ID should be logged if it he enters a wrong password 3 times, right? So that would be the functional requirement would get into the details. How does the screen look like, right? What validations you are doing at each screen level, right? What is alternate flow? What is the exception flow? All that would come in as part of your use case diagram, which is the functional requirement. You get it? So business requirement is a generic view. Whatever the client tells you, you are writing it. but the functional requirement is your perspective of what are the details that you should capture from a system perspective. I hope that gives you some clarity on business requirements and functional requirements. Right? So let's add that.
I was talking here about technical requirements that will come up like during the project. How can we specify that in BRD?
No, so that's what. Let's ask this question after we complete the non-functional requirements, right? So they're still requirements. They're not the design documents what you're assuming it to be, right? So design documents would come in later, right? So how it would translate into a classes or objects or then underlying database and all would be done as part of the design. But there are some requirements which are not functional. However, we need to get that details also as part of the requirements. Okay? So let's understand what those requirements are. So broadly, I'll give you some small examples, right? So so at least to clarify your doubt there. Now let's say you develop a fully functional, full-fledged functional system which is meeting all the client's requirements, whatever the client can think of, it's meeting, right? Now you develop it and then take it to the customer. The customer would start using it, and then he would click onto the login screen. He would go to the login screen, enter the user ID, password, and click enter. It takes him 15 seconds to log in. Do you think he will accept the system? No, right? So obviously that's not acceptable, right? Now it's not functionality, right, which is missing out there. So login functionality is there, but he's still not accepting the system. Why? Because it's still not adhering to some of the requirements, which is not functional, which is related to performance. Similarly, let's say your system gets down, shuts down every once in 4 hours. You think the customer would accept it? Let's say Facebook is an application which is developed like this, and every 4 hours it shuts down, it crashes. So those are your availability requirements. Okay. Then you'd have your password should be secure. Right? So what if somebody is able to hack into your mobile banking system and then get all your account information? Right? It's not secure. So you need some security requirements, encryption and all that. Right? So they are not functionality related, but still they are requirements from the customer. Right? We call them as non-functional requirements. Now I think so. Is that clear about what is functional and what is non-functional? Your design documents would come in later. How is functionality would be implemented, what is underlying design and all would come in later as part of the design process. But upfront, explicitly, you're agreeing that I would adhere to these non-functional requirements. I'll give you a performance of 1 second per screen. Your screens will not take more than 1 second. So that's my performance requirement. So it will all be encrypted in this particular algorithm. That's your security requirement. Then it will support this data volume, right? Even if your customer base increases to 100,000, my system would support that your data requirement, right? So you're understanding the non-functional requirements as part of the requirement analysis phase. Okay, so that's all what we would cover as part of the initial BRD. Okay. Anyway, I'll talk about this in the next session in detail. So we'll have that detailed view about what kind of non-functional requirements do we need to understand. And in a lot of projects, you will not get involved in this, right? So it will generally be handled by the technical architect itself. But having said that, it's a good topic to understand, right? So it's a good understanding to have about what are the other non-functional requirements and all. You can even though you're not actually taking up these requirements, you should have that broader understanding. Right? So we'll cover that at a very high level so that we understand what we mean by non-functional requirements. Okay.
Sir, I had a question over here.
Go ahead.
So we will be mentioning non-functional requirement just on a broader perspective, and based on that, the system architecture or other team members would
we'll
play.
discuss that tomorrow, because let's first, what is our involvement, or what level we need to know. I'll cover that. So let's not jump topics. So we'll look at it in a structured way. Okay. So tomorrow's topic would be on these non-functional requirements. But for today's topic, make sure that you understand the BRD structure and the CR structure. When you are given a task of filling in a change request, you should be able to clearly articulate what goes into it and the process, right? And you should be able to clearly articulate what is the structure of a BRD, what goes in where, right? I will ask these questions again on Friday, and everybody should be able to, respond to these questions, right? So one day every week, I'm just, blocking it for making sure that you guys understand it, right? So that's again, your training coordinators want to ensure that you understand all the topics, and I will ensure that I will ask each and everybody, and you have to answer. So be well prepared for those topics what I'm teaching. So these two questions definitely would come in from today's session on Friday. Explain the structure of a BRD, explain the structure of a change request. All right.